Yeah, that's a way, that's a tactic. But people, like, the research shows that people don't really respond well from a life overhaul. Like, that's a temporary solution. That's the keto diet. That's stuff that doesn't really stick. The joke that I kind of always play in my head of the before and after photo is like, okay, where's the actual after photo? Like, where's the now photo? Like, this was like what happened in 90 days. What happened in the 2 years after that? Usually what it took in order to create that change in 90 days is not something sustainable. What we want to create with our clients is something that lasts forever. So really, those moments of achievement and of accomplishment, of celebration, they happen all the time. But then you also have just as many days where you feel like you're not getting anywhere. And those have to happen. Like, those slip-ups have to happen. So it's, and then, you pick yourself up, you work on them, and you keep going. But
welcome to the 54th episode of Tokyo Alumni Podcast. Today, our guest graduated ASIJ in 2007, originally from the USA, but he was raised at international schools around the world, born in Northampton, Massachusetts, lived in Tanzania, North Carolina, Brazil, and Costa Rica before moving to Tokyo in 2003 when his dad, Tim Carr, became the headmaster, a position he held until moving to Jakarta in 2010 to take over the headship at Jakarta Intercultural School. He went on to study kinesiology at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. While at university, he worked for Red Bull, led the UBC Surf Club, and worked as a student athletic trainer for the UBC Rugby Team, and met his to-be wife, Laura. After graduation, he moved to Atlanta and worked at the Atlanta International School before moving back to Vancouver and starting work with Innovative Fitness as a professional training coach. In the 6 years at IF, he moved up the ranks from coach to events manager to sales manager to corporate sales to studio manager before opening his own franchise in January of 2018. He now has 12 staff and about 120 clients. He is passionate about leadership, empowerment, equality, and positively impacting the lives of his community. Welcome to the podcast, Ben.
Thank you so much.
So today we'll talk a bit about, it's on your t-shirt, fitness, but also a bit about, how COVID's affected gyms around the world, including, Canada, a bit about your experience as a TCK. We've had a lot of TCKs, third culture kids, but you're sort of a TCK on steroids, as I would put it, right? Tanzania, Costa Rica, Brazil, Japan, and also, the very exotic North Carolina. And let's start, way back sort of to your younger days. As I was mentioning a second ago, you were in a variety of places, whether it's, Africa, South America, Asia. So, how did these experiences as a TCK in a variety of locations sort of make the person you are today?
Wow, we could talk for an hour about that, I think. Yeah, I mean, it's all I know. First of all, it's my identity is kind of wrapped up in being a foreigner, and which is super interesting and kind of lend itself to various decisions that I've made onwards. But when I was younger, the first move that I vividly remember was probably the one from North Carolina to Brazil, and at the time was super upset about it. It was we showed up in São Paulo. And we're like crying about how busy and polluted and like how we didn't want to live there. And of course, fast forward 3 years later, when we're moving from Brazil to Costa Rica, we're crying about not wanting to leave the place because we loved it so much. So, and that kind of repeated. And then eventually I remember from moving to Costa Rica to Japan, that one being more of, I kind of accepted it and I knew that it was coming for a while. I think my dad got the job almost a year before we actually moved. And so we knew pretty early on. And so we had a lot of time to prepare for that. And I remember actually touching base with classmates or future classmates at the time in Japan and at ASIJ on MSN Messenger and talking about just what it was like. And so got a real feel for it. But it definitely felt like I kind of always had 2 feet into where I was headed rather than where I currently was. It was always somebody was leaving my world or I was leaving theirs, because the communities that we live in were super transient and not only was it myself who was moving around, but other people in those communities that were moving around a lot too. ASIJ was a bit of more of an anomaly where people actually stuck around for a lot longer. But the other places that we had lived, it was a lot of families. They were there for 2-3 years and they'd be bouncing out to somewhere else. So I was very used to not only me leaving, but friends leaving as well, which was hard. I mean, it wasn't until, because I've been in Vancouver now for, almost, I guess 11, 12 years or something like that. And it's weird because I have relationships and friendships that, I've had more or less since the beginning of being here, and which are some of the longest I've had in my life. Like, yeah, I held on to some along the way of living overseas, but it was just way more challenging to do so than to actually just be in one place. So forming relationships was definitely something that became, I don't know, just a bit of a novelty, I think, in being in one place for a lot longer.
You mentioned something very interesting about being a foreigner wherever you are. And, off air, we spoke a bit about, your parents are from the United States. You're also an American citizen. But is that partly, you chose UBC as, your choice college. I was very interested in that decision myself because, your background is fully American / Tanzania, Japan. So Canada was totally not on the list. So what led you towards that decision? And was that part of kind of why you have sort of this DNA in you of wanting to sort of go beyond, what would be considered, quote unquote, domestic?
Yeah, there's definitely an element of that. And I remember being at ASIJ having this kind of label as an American, but I didn't feel like one. I hadn't lived in the States since I was like 6 years old or something. But there was a lot of people there who considered the US to be home. And I found this a really interesting thing that ASIJ did on sports teams. They would put your name, your number, and your hometown. And for a lot of people, that was Tokyo, or they said it was. But then people were putting towns in the US and things like that. And I was always really confused as to what to put on that sheet. And so I found that a lot of people at the school were still rooted in the US. And I didn't feel that way at all. So I felt like, foreign again, even though I had this identity as an American at the American School of Japan, where there were other Americans who were referring to their hometowns. And I'm just like, okay, I don't fit with that. And I don't fit with Japanese quite either. So yeah, when it came to choosing a university, I absolutely was not interested in going to the States, partly because I felt like, Bush was president at the time. I wasn't really, I wasn't vibing with what the US was putting out on an international level. So I started looking in Canada. I applied to schools in Montreal, but mostly in BC is where I applied. And how I got acquainted with the area was through some friends. Through a friend in particular that I met through the Thorntons, working at summer day camp, and so we connected, and then she kind of opened my eyes to the sort of Vancouver, lower BC area. I went and visited it once, and I was just like, okay, yeah, this is great. Let's do this.
Kind of fell in love with the city.
Yeah, exactly. Plus, I had no idea what I wanted to do in university, and then the idea of kinesiology and sports, that being kind of a career path, that resonated with me in a big way too. So UBC kind of had the best of both worlds.
Was that interest like in just athletics and fitness, all that? Was that something pretty deep rooted from your times in high school?
Yeah, and earlier, I think I was, for as long as I can remember, I've been involved in sports, and that took shape. And this is another interesting thing about the moving around a lot, is every school that we lived in had different sports available. So in elementary school, and I was playing soccer, and then eventually I played volleyball because I couldn't play basketball yet. Like that didn't start until grade 7 or something. I played basketball for a while, and plus some other things. Then I moved to ASIJ, and then there was football. So I was like, okay, I'm super stoked to start with that. And so I played football at ASIJ for 4 years, and baseball as well, which I couldn't play either of those sports in any school that I had been in before that. So it kind of morphed. My athletic career changed with every move. And then eventually I just kind of felt like, okay, if there's an opportunity to pursue this as a career. And at the time of ASIJ, actually, I spent a ton of time in the athletic trainer's room, partly because I was injured sometimes, a lot of the time, but also because I just really loved learning about it.
That's funny you mentioned, being injured, because that does seem to be a common thread with athletic trainers, like, at various levels. They see a lot of them, gone through injuries themselves. I don't know if you've ever read the book by, was it Paul Lake? I think he played for Manchester City. And he basically tore his ACL like 20 times. It's something absurd. It's not, I've heard of 5, 6, but something like 20 times. And this was before the technology today, like in the 80s and 90s. So he basically, his career was ended like at 21, 22. But now he's a full-time, trainer. So I know personally, as someone who's also torn both ACLs, I find his story very inspiring.
Because I remember I was in there for myself, but then I learned to kind of tape up my own injuries and things like that. So I would just kind of visit and grab the things I needed and then do it myself half the time. And then I wanted to learn about it. So I was kind of spending extra time in there, observing and watching how injuries were assessed and treated and dealt with and taped. And so eventually sometimes I was taping up my classmates and putting ice packs on them. It was fun.
So this sort of like love towards, fitness and especially sort of that recovery, seemed to be embedded from a very early age. What I'm curious is, a lot of people have gone on in regards to athletics to pursue a career like in teaching, like physical education, which you did do a year at Atlanta. So at what point did you sort of feel like, working at the fitness gym, what was the route you wanted to take as opposed to, let's say, teaching PE?
Yeah. So that year in Atlanta was awesome because it was a mishmash of so many different jobs. Normally they have a couple interns helping with athletics, some with assistant PE teaching. And in my case, they just decided to bring me on full-time rather than part-time and give me just this kind of well-rounded situation where I was doing assistant PE teaching, which was actually in Spanish, which was kind of cool. It was a fully bilingual school, and there were different streams. And because I spoke Spanish, I was actually assistant PE teacher to the teacher who was teaching PE in Spanish, which was awesome. So did that. I was also coaching some of the middle school sports, which was in English. I was working with the athletics department and putting on varsity games and running the clock and various other things. And what else? Oh, and at the time I was also working with a CrossFit coach who was the husband of one of our other PE teachers. We became friends, and I was training in CrossFit myself and also shadowed and helped coach some of the classes that he was running. And so I got a ton of exposure to different sort of career options in that 1 year. It was like the option, the PE option, the coaching option, the adult coaching option through CrossFit, plus a little bit of the athletic training and injury stuff that they had a trainer at the school, and I kind of worked with him occasionally too. So from there, I kind of was pulled a little bit more towards the fitness side. And adults are fun to train and teach because you can level with them like humans who, in a different way. You can call them out on crap and swear at them sometimes if it's appropriate. And so I found that, I found it really fun. And I also wanted to explore a little bit more on the injury and rehab side of it as well, which I then ended up doing a little bit more on.
That's intriguing. So you've had you've tried these variety of athletics related occupations, and you're where you're at today. And how long have you been at Innovative Fitness for?
So I started as a coach in 2012. So that was about 6 years at our Kitsilano location, which is another part of Vancouver. And then owned my own for 3 years now, or maybe just a little bit over three and a half. Technically we've been in our space for 3 years, but we started training people a little bit before that.
When you train adults, you mentioned there's that sort of difference between, be a bit more straight with them in comparison to maybe teaching children. And, what I was wondering was, what is more challenging for like a fitness coach to get someone who's like very athletic and very fit and very demanding, who wants to, someone who's maybe like an amateur, the highest level within like an amateur level, or basically getting someone who is, has never been to a gym in their life. They're not motivated, but like they at least are showing up. So like, have you seen those extremes, and, how have you dealt with it differently?
It's interesting. They're totally different challenges. You have the person who is new to fitness and doesn't have it built into their lifestyle. The biggest challenge is working it into their life. Because really, if you think about them and what they currently are doing, they've filled their schedule. Like everybody who's of the age-ish that our clients are, which is usually between, say, 35 and 55. They've got jobs, they've got kids, they've got mortgages, they've got stuff going on. So now we're trying to insert this new behavior, which is ultimately going to, hopefully impact them positively. But that's a real challenge for them on adjusting their entire routine and lifestyle and, way of being around this new thing that we're then incorporating called fitness, which comes with recovery, which comes with sleep, which comes with hydration, comes with like nutrition. There's so many other things to it than just showing up to the gym for an hour. And then you have the athlete who already has it built in, knows exactly, what their body responds well to, what it doesn't. They're this fine-tuned machine that has probably had injuries, has probably had issues, has probably like trained well and trained poorly. And, so depending on where you're catching them in that cycle, you're not really trying to create new behaviors per se. You're just tweaking what they're already doing. Mm-hmm. And now when it comes to results though, you take this person who's unfit, untrained, doesn't have anything, you give them a couple hours a week of exercise, it's going to change their life. Mm-hmm. Whereas you take this person who's a seasoned athlete, you have to be extremely specific and create the right stimulus to affect the kind of change that you want to see in that person in order to achieve the result that you want. Mm-hmm. So it's just a totally different game.
And I mean, so you've been there now for 6 years. Have there been any clients that especially come to your mind when you think of sort of like you've seen just massive change with their training regimen and,
yeah,
maybe like the most impact on you?
Totally. I mean, it's every day. And it usually doesn't show up as, you kind of have this stereotypical image of the fitness industry. And this is something that we're actively working as a company to counter, this image of the before and after picture, where pretty much anybody who signs up to work with a personal trainer has this idea of this transformation that they're going to embark on, which isn't untrue. But at what point do you say, all right, we're at that after photo now? You can't just, unless you're saying like, okay, we're going to challenge you for 90 days. We're going to see like how much we can get out of you. And then we're going to see what results happen. Yeah, that's a way, that's a tactic. But people, like the research shows that people don't really respond well from a life overhaul. Like that's a temporary solution. That's the keto diet. That's stuff that doesn't really stick. The joke that I kind of always play in my head of the before and after photo is like, okay, where's the actual after photo? Like where's the now photo? Like this was like what happened in 90 days. What happened in the 2 years after that? Usually what it took in order to create that change in 90 days is not something sustainable. What we want to create with our clients is something that lasts forever. So really those moments of achievement and of accomplishment, of celebration, they happen all the time. But then you also have just as many days where you feel like you're not getting anywhere. And those have to happen. Like those slip ups have to happen. So it's, and then, you pick yourself up, you work on them and you keep going. But it can come from little things like, oh, I can do 12 push-ups this week when last week I could only do 10. Or it could be like, oh my God, my knees don't hurt when I'm walking down this hike that I do all the time. So it's little things like that we experience all over the place.
So it seems like you guys are all about changing habits, right? Getting that, as you said, if you're, you got mortgages, you got jobs to go to, how do you sort of put into, this already for many people busy schedule workout routine? And I think it's sort of a good segue into what we spoke about off air a bit. You have that book, I think it's called the 5 a.m. Club. And I've definitely seen a few other books too that, talk about you have to get up early, work out early. So, what is your personal experience sort of around that? And, is that sort of the real deal that early morning workout is the best way to work out?
It's interesting because, as I was saying to you off air, like the early morning life was something that I had started to do a long time ago, just out of necessity, because we're training clients at 6 a.m. I'm not really training anybody anymore, but I still kind of tend to wake up early and do my own fitness first thing in the morning. I think there's something to be said for having nothing else that's pulling at your attention. If you all normally wake up at 7 and then you all of a sudden set your alarm for 6, then you've just created an hour of your day where you have zero habits already formed and there's zero demands on that time. You can kind of create whatever you want. So that's kind of what I found when I started doing. And so the 5 a.m. club for me, because I was training people at 6 a.m. actually was the 4 a.m. club. I was literally waking up at 4 a.m. I would wake up, I would go for like a 20-minute run just around the neighborhood, no matter how wet or dark or disgusting it was, come home, journal, or do some kind of quiet reflection, and then after that I would get my stuff together and start making some food and not look at my phone. And it was an amazing time of day where, like I said, like nothing else, you have nothing else to do. There's no more emails, nobody's going to be responding to you anyway or reading what you are sending them. So I think it's an interesting way of forming a new habit, because you're not fighting against anything. If you try to create a new habit anywhere else, there's something that usually holds that time. Mm-hmm. And so the more research is coming out about habits and creating new ones and building new things into your routine, it's all about tricking yourself into adopting a behavior that is sort of piggybacks on something you already do. So rather than starting to work out in the afternoon after you're done work, when that was never a thing for you before, it's sometimes easier to just wake up an hour earlier and do it then, because you have a routine, you have a ritual of when you're done work. Maybe you don't realize what it is, but people finish work, they get on the bus or they get in their car, they come home, they greet their spouse, or they do something. There's something that they're going to have to cut or change in order to insert exercise. So sometimes early mornings is easier.
Yeah, that's really intriguing. That seems to be the trend. And as you said, I mean, I don't know about the 4 a.m. club. That just seems absurd to me. But that seems like the 5 a.m., 6 a.m. club. I think definitely a lot of people could sign up for that. And you mentioned a few times now things about recovery as well as nutrition. So I think this whole area of just athletics expanded, right, a lot more in comparison to 20 years ago when you had these gym rats essentially who would just pump iron. And now it's a lot more since I'm talking, probably the viewer couldn't see it, but you were just drinking water right now, and we were just talking off air about water too. What would you say, whether they are a former athlete or just someone who's trying to get into better habits eating wise, what are some of the first things you tell your clients to, that they can change right away?
I mean, water's a great one, actually. And it's something that has huge benefits when you're drinking. I'm honestly the worst at water. Especially I think, and here's an interesting thing about habits as well. Something as simple as wearing a mask, as so many of us are doing now. I don't know where the study is. I don't know if there actually is one, but I bet you anything people are drinking less water now. Just because you have to pull a mask down in order to do it. And then maybe you have to think about washing your hands afterwards or something. So, and that's honestly been enough friction for me to drink less water. I've just noticed it lately. So, but yeah, it is definitely one of the easier things to implement right away. That and sleep. If you can get somebody to add an hour of sleep, the benefits are massive. That's when recovery happens. That's when you switch off. You can't be stressed while you're sleeping. And stress is the biggest killer when it comes to results or being prone to injury or anything like that. your cortisol levels, when they're super high, it creates tension and inflammation in the body. And almost the worst thing you can do is go and have a super hard workout when you're in that state. But we kind of fight against that with our clients a lot, because they tend to be fairly high stress, high result people for the most part. And so there's definitely some re-education that has to happen when we bring someone on. But with people, when they're starting off, the lowest hanging fruit changes depending on the goals. If it's somebody who's more interested in being in less pain because of injury, then perhaps adding in things like movement are going to do more benefit than focusing on the water, or focusing on the sleep will still be actually super important. But we tend to not overload people at the beginning. We try to play it in step by step.
That's interesting about the overwork. I mean, are you familiar with apps like Strava? Right? I know, I think I've seen you on Strava, and I as someone I'm reasonably active. At least I used to run more. You might remember. And I see people older than me post, just went on a run, 12K, 15K. And when I go running, my body just, kind of shuts down at 6, 7K. But then there's part of me now that wonders, if I begin to run 10, 15K, is that going to have adverse effects and actually start hurting my body? Or is it myself not pushing myself enough? So how, especially, guys our age, or as we enter our 30s, 40s, maybe we're not quite where we were athletically at 20. How do we sort of balance that? Because there's part of me that wants to be kind, to myself. But then there's part of me that's thinking like, you're slowly, just kind of.
It's a great question. And I mean, depending on how fast you're running, 6 or 7K, like it might be 30 minutes. It might be 40. It depends on what that is for you. But and then how much are you warming up beforehand? How much are you cooling down after? Like, are you literally just putting on your shoes, running 6K, and then you're in the shower? Because all that plays into what the effect of that run is for you. For one person, that distance doesn't mean the same as somebody else's 12K. Your 7K might be like super well warmed up, well run, well cooled down. It really takes you like, an hour plus all in. And that other person who's running 12 is just blasting it, and they're taking the same amount of time to do theirs. The training effect is totally different. But the question that you have is around kind of like it's when to push and when to kind of take it easy. And one thing that we tell our people a lot is consider everything you've done in that day or in that week, and then make a decision, because and be real with yourself. Because if you've been working like crazy, maybe for you it's the end of year, you've got a lot of wrap up school stuff to do, and it's it's high stress, it's like deadlines, there's a lot going on. Like, that's not the time to push yourself from 7 to 12K. Pick the holidays, like take time outside of that, and ramp it up like little by little. Don't just do it overnight, because if you double your volume overnight, regardless of the training benefit, you want to progress things into it for sure.
And mentioned it earlier, abs are made in the kitchen. What does that mean? And what is that? Is that a fitness term that like people in the fitness world take seriously, or is it just sort of like an urban legend or myth or whatever you want to call it?
This is one of those like fitness industry things that I hate so much, and it's not because it's untrue. It's because it places so much more emphasis on the aesthetic than on the function or the intention. And I mean, okay, so say somebody really wants to have a six-pack. There's really only one thing that creates a six-pack, and that is losing fat. Like, everybody has abdominal muscles. Like, you'd be bending over backwards and breaking your spine if you didn't. Everyone's seen like a 5-year-old kid who's just ripped and they've got a six-pack. Like, it's just, it doesn't mean you're necessarily strong. It doesn't mean anything per se. But the abs are made in kitchen thing is just like, you're not going to get abs by doing a bunch of ab work. You will, but what people are talking about when they're saying things like that is having the leanness to see the actual muscles themselves. I would way rather somebody have a strong core than have a six-pack. Not necessarily the same thing. When it's talk about as being in the kitchen, it's just talking about losing fat, losing weight is what they're talking about.
So you're not a big fan of the term. You think it's kind of deceptive?
I think that the fitness industry overall has, and I say fitness industry, but really it's become this weight loss industry.
Mm-hmm.
The amount of money, the amount of fad diets, the amount of BS that has been marketed to people, sold to people on the basis of this is the ideal image that everybody should be pushing towards, and this is why, and people who come to us, they're feeling inadequate about themselves, self-conscious, and they think that losing 10 pounds is going to fix that. And it's really sad. And that's one of the things, and I think, that line, it just feeds into that world to me. And what we really want to have people accomplish is a sense of empowerment. Like we want to leave people feeling like they can take something on, feel really good about the results that they achieve, and then go on to take on bigger and better and more challenging things. And that they have the ability, they have the efficacy to do that. Really, like, I love it when we get somebody, and sounds counterintuitive, but I love it when we have a client who comes to us and says, like, hey, you know what? I think I'm going to give it a go on my own for a while now. Sometimes it really works. Sometimes they're missing the accountability and the scheduledness of that session, but they feel like they can. So that's awesome. I don't want people to feel like they need to train with us in order to feel adequate or to feel like they're, worthy or whatever. So what we want to give people is that sense of empowerment rather than that symptom fix that they feel like they're going to achieve by losing that 10 pounds.
That's a great point. Yeah, I didn't really think about how the diet industry sort of has hacked into, in a sense, the fitness industry with, these various products and catch lines and ideas. And you're mentioning empowerment, and I know you've talked about this a bit, maybe like on your Instagram at some points, but what, as like a leader right now, of your gym, right? You have, I think, 12 staff under you and hundreds of clients, 120, I think, 120 clients. How do you sort of lead, and where do you get your examples from?
All over the place, honestly. Like, I was really lucky to have found this company. Like, the people who founded it did so on the basis of empowering people and of really giving people ownership over their own life, over their own fitness. And what we do and how we do it is through taking people outside of their comfort zones. Not just in the gym, but we actually literally lead people around the world and do adventures and take people to different destinations to run races or climb mountains or achieve things that these bucket list items that they're like, oh yeah, one day I'll do Kilimanjaro. It's like, okay, so like next year, let's train for that. So like, that's what we created. That's what this company is created on, is on the basis of empowerment through experience, through challenge, through adversity. That was definitely an inspiration of mine. The other ones, and I accumulate new ones every week, I swear, is different people to follow, different schools of thought to listen to. But the authoritarian leadership, which I think is honestly something of the past, I would honestly credit my dad and both my parents really with some of this. That it was always kind of like a choose your path kind of attitude. And if given choices and that feeling that you're a part of the process, you become way more bought in to that process. And so when I'm talking about leading my team or us leading clients, we don't want to just say like, this is where we're going, follow. We want to say, look, here's what I see. Here's what I see is possible, but it's your choice. And here's where we want to get to. Like, here's where you said you want to go. But these are different ways that we can get there. So like, let's talk about what's going to work for you and what's going to work for us and what's going to motivate you. So it takes more time, but the results are way better. And you get a whole team of people, like this team who literally carried this business through a pandemic, bought in and treating it like it's theirs.
That's a great point. Yeah, it's like, yeah, it reminds me of like sports teams, huh? Just basically you need to lead with that, mentality of having trying to achieve high goals, but same time, if the players don't buy in, it's like, that's it. As the saying goes in sports, right? You lose a locker room. And I guess that very much relates to like, leading a group of people in a company. And you just mentioned COVID, crazy time to be, involved in the fitness. So how has that ride been for you guys? I guess what, last 9 months or so?
Yeah. So pandemic on our end on the West Coast in Canada really hit. I mean, it kind of did with all of us in mid-March. And so I was in Palm Springs actually, with my wife and her parents. And while I was there, all of a sudden things were getting kind of crazy, and I was talking to my team over here. We were having to order hand sanitizer and various other things. No one knew what the heck was going on. And then all of a sudden, as we got on some emergency calls with all the other franchise owners and our corporate head office, and made the decision on March 15th to close all of our locations. And there was no mandate to do so at the time. We just thought it was the right thing to do. We didn't think it was going to be, this big of a thing. We were like, okay, we'll close for 2 weeks. We'll help flatten this curve. Then we'll, hopefully be back open. We were closed for 2 months. And wow. So two and a half. We reopened June 1st, but like the first thing that happened is we created like, okay, what is our action plan here? And after deliberating a lot, what we ended up doing is pivoting fully over to a virtual training model. And we didn't just, grab Zoom and say, okay, train your people with Zoom. We actually built our own platform called IF Direct, where we could service our clients. And then we created all these little fun updates on the platform that we could use to train people. So little things like we can capture an image, like draw lines on it, and hey, look, this is how you're squatting, like check this. And so we built that in like a couple weeks. It was insane. And then we managed in that time to train our entire teams on how to train people virtually. And that not only came with how to do it, but how to set up your space and everything. So we had everybody set up their own home studios and contacted all of our clients to say like, hey, who wants to keep going? We ended up getting about a 30% uptick on that. And, the rest were either unable or, it wasn't for them, and that's fine. So then when we reopened in June, of course, everything changed. We had lines taped off on the ground for each individual training session. We created these pods around the studio, and all of the training sessions were being done in those pods. So like you'd be with your coach. The coach was wearing a face shield. Now, as things have progressed a little bit more, now coaches are wearing masks. Clients are wearing masks everywhere except for their pod. Like once they're right inside there, they're allowed to take it off if they want to. Some people keep it on still, but it's been nuts. Like, like I keep checking myself because it's just like there's something new all the time. There's new government grants that come out, which are really helpful, but we need to stay on top of those. There's equipment or supplies that we need to order. Cleaning had to be ramped up. It was pretty insane.
Yeah, that sounds like quite the ride, especially 2.5 months closed. And that's good to hear though about the grants. I know, but that's good to hear that it seems like the Canadian government has I don't want to get too political on this podcast, but they've definitely done a better job than the $600 that's about to come to the hands of Americans in 2021.
Yeah, no, I'm grateful to be in Canada. It's on a business level, on a personal level. Yeah, no, the government support's been absolutely amazing for my business. I know some others, have slipped through the cracks in some ways. It's not perfect. Obviously, it's never going to be perfect, but we've benefited tremendously from that, and it's really saved us in a huge way. So like we're not actually in a deficit. anymore at all. And so we're running a viable business now. And we're at pre-pandemic numbers and have been for the past like three or 4 months or so.
It's really encouraging to hear. And I imagine these online apps too, and maybe I'm being too optimistic, but there's companies like Twitter, Facebook now that allow remote learning, what do they call it? Remote working. That's it. Sorry, it's such a simple term.
Oh, yeah.
And there's all these things. So I was just thinking, like, maybe even with the apps you guys made, now that's going to be around forever. And even this.
Totally.
Even this podcast too, like, I mean, it's sort of a product of the COVID. And I mean, I still plan on continuing it, a year, 2 years, 3 years from now. So it's been interesting to see some things have sort of laid its seeds and, might continue on in this post, pandemic world.
What I was just going to say is I think it's just created this new opening for people to explore different types of doing things, different ways of doing things. Whether it's working from home, whether it's training, with your personal trainer from home, but the trainer's on the computer, people are just willing to give it a go. And I think that's kind of one of the biggest things that has impacted us is like, if you had come out with a product like this pre-pandemic, people would be like, I'm not doing that. Like, it seems dumb. I'd rather go into the gym because there's no reason why you couldn't. And now, like, it's people have tried it, people like it, we've refined it, and then when, say, we're getting back to people going on business trips, for instance, like, they don't have to miss the 2 weeks of training that they're spending over in Toronto or New York. We can still keep it going. So it's gonna be great for that.
It's like that meme, where this meeting could have been an email. I just feel like it's that like on a much higher level now. It's kind of like, well, you don't need to fly to, Albuquerque or whatever, like, for this meeting. You can just do it online for an hour, and you save the flight, you save the hotel. There's definitely
like, I mean, I hope that turns out well for us because, like I said, like the type of clients that we have, they're usually high level execs or people who tend to be, flying around all over the place, it seems. And I feel like that's going to happen a lot less now.
Yeah, I agree. That seems to be the trend. And earlier you were talking about, at ASIJ, I remember this too. You'd have your name, I think it was your grade, and hometown. And as you said, it's always very interesting because, for some people it's clear cut, like I'm born and bred in Tokyo, but for a lot of kids, they've lived in a variety of places. So my final question for you, Ben, is now, at age 30. Sorry, did I get that right? Oh, dude, I thought I was 32 and you were 30. I just realized I'm 34. I forgot my own age. So
sorry about that, dude.
I don't know if I keep that part. I might. Sometimes I just keep stuff in, but I'll rephrase it. So now, at age 32, if you were to sort of have to put down your football, roster, Ben Carr, grade, whatever you'd be, grade 25 or something now, what would you put down as your hometown today?
That's a really great question. I mean, I've lived here longer than I've lived anywhere, but the rest of where I've lived and where I've grown up is such a part of me that I don't know if I could put down anything. Like I think I put down something like "Ask me later." Meet me by the bar, and I'll tell you. Like, I don't know. It's but yeah, the closest thing to it would be Vancouver for sure. Yeah, it's such a complicated thing for me.
I find it inspiring because I teach internationally too, and I think a lot of people don't know, right? There's a lot of people, even a lot of kids who are half Japanese like myself. Right now we're in our 30s, so some of them have spent about half their life in the U.S., half in Tokyo. But in your case, I think your example sort of illustrates that one could go to a city that they have no connection with, fall in love with someone too, and marry, and pursue a job, and essentially make a new home. So I find that very sort of hopefully the direction, you know, the entire world is going in the 21st century. There's a lot less of this sort of nativism where, you know, you're from somewhere. No, that's
I understand being a part of a community like that. I understand, but why does that? I don't understand why it has to be tied to a place, or like. I mean, I feel like often and historically maybe it has been, but I mean, there've been nomadic people forever, and their identity is not in where they are; it's in who they're with. And I feel like over the years I've collected people, and you know, there's you know, it was my birthday actually last week, and so I'm communicating with a whole lot of them, and there are people in every part of the world that you can imagine that I'm, you know, having a quick little chat with, and that's kind of my cheesy hometown, I guess you could say, is the connections that I have.
Well put. Yeah, so it's not a location but a community. And as we conclude, I like to ask the guests at the end, what is to come in the next few years, next few decades? So yeah, the mic is yours.
Well, I'm trying not to plan too much more than about a month away, on the business front at least. So yeah, we're coming into the new year. We're very optimistic about how things are going. Personal training seems to be less effective than something like group classes, which are currently closed in BC. But yeah, so we've got high hopes for what's going to turn out in the new year. We hired a couple of new coaches recently, and the team is on fire. So we're really excited to see what happens when people really get moving. On the home front, we got a dog. We got a pandemic dog, and she's just been spayed, and she's absolutely insane at the moment. She's something about her age and hormonal levels, but I'm really looking forward to that, chilling out so we can go on some snowshoe hikes and whatever else, and get outdoors with her again, because she needs it really badly. My wife Laura, she's a nurse. She's doing contact tracing actually for COVID, and so looking forward to her actually injecting people with the vaccine, hopefully at some point fairly soon, and this thing turning a corner. Beyond that, into the next year, I'm actually talking with my brother about doing a couples trip where he doesn't know this actually yet, but I'm going to push to have us book something in late summer or early fall next year. Optimistically, everything's cancelable right now anyway, so that we can all go and just hang out on a beach and chill out for a bit, hug.
Yeah, that sounds like a great plan, man. And I hope things transpire, and it looks like it will. Hopefully, with, you know, nurses like your wife injecting those vaccines. You know, you might as well call this podcast like a COVID series, because I feel like you just go each season, like you see it progressively getting better. So I see it by, you know, maybe season 7 or 8. Truly just looking back on it at the past. But yeah, thanks for joining us today on episode 54, Tokyo Alumni Podcast. And yeah, thank you, Ben.
Thank you so much. This is really cool.